Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to get into the vibe of spooky season because realistically, what else is there to look forward to in life these days? Existential dread aside, it's been a while since I've read some creepy stories from the subreddit Let's Not Meet. Every story I'm reading will be linked down below in the order that it's read, and I did ask each author for their permission to share it, so we're all clear on that end. If you enjoy this, let me know because I have a bunch of other stories I already got permission for, so I can make a second video. Anyway, before we get into the creepy stories, I did want to thank today's sponsor, which is Shudder. AMC Network's Shudder is a premium streaming video service super serving fans of all degrees with the best selection of horror and thrillers. The cool thing about Shudder is that there's a community filled with reviews and even member-only perks such as exclusive releases and VIP movie screenings. You can stream great thrillers, horror, and suspense for $5.99 a month or $56.99 a year, and on all of your favorite devices such as Amazon Fire TV, Roku, Xbox One, iOS, and Android. Shudder has a unique, human-curated collection of exclusive and original films and series. To try Shudder for free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use promo code ReadyToGlare. One specific movie I recommend is a Shudder exclusive titled The Room, which is about a couple who move into a new home and find a room that can grant wishes. But things inevitably turn quite grim. I highly recommend it. Thank you again to Shudder for sponsoring this video, and remember to try Shudder for free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use promo code ReadyToGlare. I'm omitting identifying details for privacy's sake. If your world absolutely cannot go on without them, feel free to DM me. You've got a 50-50 shot of me answering or telling you to F off. Take it back to 2007-2008. I was 16 when this began, 18-19 when it finally went to court. Picture a Norman Rockwell-esque suburban family. Parents, 3 kids, a yard, and a dog in Blink and You'll Miss It, USA. One random day, a neighbor man had a mild dispute with his neighbor. As a totally warranted response, neighbor man, NM here on out, takes every hose he has and floods their yard. Solid decisions lead to solid consequences, so naturally, he was fined for water waste. My parent runs the water in small town USA, and because NM lived a block from us, he decided to drive over to the water district shouting that he is an acquaintance of my parent. Second solid decision of many to come from NM. Absolutely no one takes kindly to name droppers, folks, so tuck that gem away under life facts. My parent comes in and tells him that even if his kids did this, they would have the same repercussions. Gracefully glossing over the fact that other than maybe driving by one another, none of us have actually interacted with NM. NM repeats the name of the man working the front desk as well as my parents' name and claims it's now personal and storms out. My family members and I begin to see NM at random places constantly. The DMV, the grocery store, our respective jobs. Apparently, when you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and your parents pay for your house, you have all kinds of time to stalk. It went from random sightings while out and about to phone calls. The cliche 90s type of call, breathe, hang-ups, and I can see you variety. At this point, NM was more of an annoyance than scary, but as I have stated, when you underestimate crazy, you lose every time. NM began parking across from our house, staying from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m., literally just sitting in his car, blasting music, staring at the house. Fool must have had determination and bladder of a racehorse because what the fuck? Who sits there for 10-ish hours? His music was trash too. Maybe he was a masochist and into self-harm, seeing how long he could suffer through shitty music in a full bladder. I doubt anyone with a semi-rational concept of social interaction could fathom why. This went from 3 to 4 times a week to a nightly occurrence. Imagine being a 16-year-old female that doesn't even feel comfortable to change in her room because of the prospect he might see through the blinds somehow. Trying to sleep knowing he's out there. We were prisoners in our own home. He began to get bolder. NM drove his car, speeding and up onto the sidewalk at my sibling and her partner while they were on the sidewalk out front, coming home from a date. They both had to physically jump out of the way to avoid being hit. He made lewd gestures at me when I brought my dog out for a walk and was waiting for my sibling to come out and join us on the walk. It was so bad I ended up crying and going inside. This had been going on for a year at this point. The cops always said the same thing. There's nothing we can do unless there's a threat made against you or someone is harmed. My parent confronted, meaning tired of his shit and asking him what he thinks he's doing. NM in the street after my incident, to which NM called the cops and they came asking why we were harassing and threatening NM. I will never understand why the system waits until you're a victim rather than prevent someone from being victimized. Almost 2 years in and it's Christmas time. My parent has a brain aneurysm. Fortunately, they make it through without any lingering effects, which is extremely rare. I convinced my other parent, who had been living at the hospital with their sick partner, to come home and shower and eat. About 9 p.m. and we get a knock on the door. A random man in ratty clothes holding a Christmas present says he's there to deliver it to family name. We ask who sent him and he says he can't say. We ask who he works for, and he shoves the gift at my parent and leaves. We're obviously uncomfortable to open it. Parent decides they need to know what it is and opens the present. Inside is a 17-page document of the grounds on why NM is suing my parent that was currently in the hospital. Even I could tell it was fake with the grammatical errors and typos. NM took the time to sit down and type this up himself, thinking it would scare us. This document and fake details he put in did not. The fact this 40-something-year-old man was so fixated on our family that he sat and typed a 17-page fake document did scare us. Things progress, and NM began pacing in front of our car and pretending to have phone calls where he talked about pushing my parent down the stairs or knowing where we kids went to school and worked and how easy it would be to access us at any time. At the time, I worked a closing shift that let me off at about 1 a.m. He would be parked next to my car and follow me home. One time, I even tried to take random roads and he still stayed right behind me. Pulling up to the house with NM parked across the street, think neighborhood street with maybe 5 feet between a car parked on one side and the other, and having to get out and run to the door was a nightmare. We were all exhausted from not only the aneurysm scare, but also looking over our shoulders. My parents' friend told her friend, who is a DA, district attorney, about the situation. She called and came over and took our case on pro bono. Testifying was a wild ride. We had to put in official statements prior to being called to the stand. We were not allowed to be in the room when a family member was testifying, nor were we allowed to talk in the halls as we waited for our turn. Imagine reliving 2+ years of traumatic experiences, being cross-examined, where you are made out to be a liar, and then not able to have your family comfort or support you afterwards was not ideal. There was enough to put him away for 1.5 years, as well as grant a felony restraining order. We moved while he was still incarcerated. My sister passed while he was in prison, and he immediately tried to sue her estate. She was 21 at her death when he was released. He claimed that her testimony from him running his car at her and her partner was false, and the only reason he was locked up, not the case as there were harassment and stalking charges, and that the money people donated to a GoFundMe for accident he was entitled to. There's so many more details, but this was already long enough. So NM, let's never ever meet again. You made us prisoners in our own home for years, clearly are still the same and have not learned a thing from your time locked up. Truly, I say this quite often, but this is perhaps one of my biggest nightmares, aside from home invasion, which I have recurring nightmares about. Actually, I'm actually traumatized. It's not funny, but I'm laughing to get through it. The concept of someone dedicating that much time and attention to you is very alarming to me. And the concept of being afraid in your own house, like I said, home invasion is a fear of mine, so like this relates. The concept of being afraid in your own house is something that I truly think is often underestimated. Kind of like when there's a break-in in someone's house and, you know, people might be relieved that nothing's stolen, but most of the time, the real scary aspect is someone got in here so someone could get in here again. And I get that same kind of vibe with this stalker, the kind of thing of like always being on edge. And I feel like it affects every single aspect of your life, because if you're afraid like that, you're probably not going to sleep well, which then makes work harder, which then makes, you know, like if you don't sleep well, you can have bad headaches, nausea, weight gain, weight loss. Like there are all these other things that just add up into just living a hellish life. And frankly, I'm glad these people got away, because that is truly alarming, to say the least. About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window, which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, friendly guy had issues with his work visa and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off, but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy, but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang with, but was also okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for the month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I'm woken up at 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. Roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looks at me dead in the eye and says, "So do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused, because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him, and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room, that he saw me in the side alley out the window arguing with our landlord, whom I'd never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, None of that ever happened. After staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and doesn't bring it up again. Next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time he says he saw me arguing with my boyfriend, I was single at the time, had seen me talking with our other roommate, who's in Hawaii, and asking me for the badge number of the officer I'd spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this shit out because I'm not doing anything and don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and he says, I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, call an ambulance, and leaves for a bit. Only to start knocking again about an hour later, and when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the fuck alone and leave for work. I go to work as normal and I'm reluctant to return that night, but I'm too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. About 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door. Walking in and out of each room, turning lights on and off, mumbling angrily, and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he cannot see inside. Suddenly he screams, I can't live like this, why are you doing this to me? I think he's on the phone and don't respond. After a few moments, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the fuck out of there. So I very quietly creep out of bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, I hear you, and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door but not touching the door itself. I look toward my window and see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear against the glass. I was fucking terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between the rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside my door and not inside my room, so I know that when I leave, I'm going to need a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out the front door again, at which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on, and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams, do you want to fucking fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight, I swear to God. I'm a very small 5-foot girl, and this guy is easily 3 times my size, so I'm definitely not looking to fight, thanks. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights, and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure I can't hear any movement and then decide to take my chance. I took a breath and pulled my door open quickly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later and see him standing shirtless with a pair of boxers and sock on in the dark of the hallway, his arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no for me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in hand. I run about half a block barefoot before I stop to put them on. When I look back, he's standing in the porch light of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away, and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He says he doesn't remember anything that happened or wasn't sure if it was real or not, but if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sent me a photo of the house keys sitting on the table and says, "I'm out. Nothing else." I take a friend over there with me to scout it and ensure that he has actually left. When we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all of the fire alarms out of the ceilings, he had unscrewed them and removed the deadbolt to the front door and left them lined up neatly on the table. We then realized that my front door can only lock by using a key from the outside and that it had been locked when we arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. This is one of the main reasons that I have never, ever had roommates. In college, I chose a single dorm and it was the smallest room ever. Like, I think I've mentioned this before, that if I opened a drawer, I couldn't open the door because the drawer would be in the way. And if I ever opened my suitcase, I couldn't open the door or the drawers. Like, that's how small it was. It truly is as big as I think an average bathroom. And I still chose to be in a single room because I did not want to deal with someone I don't know. And I think that's one of the craziest things to me about roommates is that obviously a lot of people choose their friends as roommates, but for people who pick a complete outsider, I don't know how you can sleep at night. Like, they could be a murderer. Like, I understand the reasons why people do that. Obviously, rent is less, whatever, but it's like psychologically, it would be very difficult for me to not freak the fuck out. And maybe that's just because I'm an anxious person, but then I read stories like this and I'm like, maybe you're justified in being really anxious about it. But clearly this person was not mentally well. Then again, that doesn't also justify the harassment that this person went through. That's a straight up no for me. I'm glad no one got hurt, but that is traumatizing. Hi, so this is my first post in this sub. I want to start off by saying that reading all the encounters posted here has made me want to share my own. I don't know if it's as intense as some, but my experience definitely scared the shit out of me. To start, let me explain myself. I'm 5'7", 113 pounds, and I was 16 at the time of the encounter. I'm a multi-sport athlete: track, handball, volleyball, basketball, and hockey, and I have insomnia. This all happened around 2 a.m. on August 10th of 2019. I'd been over to my best friend's place because she had returned home from a vacation and she had birthday presents for me. Hoodies and gummies, if you're curious. I'd spent almost an hour there already and wanted to head back home soon because honestly, my town is scary at night. Drug dealers, rapists, and murderers, you know the deal. So I waved goodbye to my best friend and started walking down her street. I guess a party had just let up because behind me, at the end of the road, about 20 or 30 yards from where I was standing, there were a couple of men walking across the crosswalk. They were both pretty tall, I'm guessing between 5'11" and 6'3". The two seemed harmless at first when I looked in their direction, but soon they came to a stop. They were both looking at me. At this point I felt uncomfortable, so I just kept walking. That's when I overheard what one of them said. "Hey, that's a girl." At this point I whipped my head around. They were starting to walk in my direction now, and one of the two men had moved over towards the sidewalk where there was no light. I knew at this point that something wasn't right, and I began to pick up my pace. They were still getting closer. I didn't know where the second guy was, but when I looked back, the first guy was still following me down the middle of the road. I think they were planning to cut me off and trap me between the two of them. The minute I was about 13 yards from the T intersection, I started to run, and that's when the yelling started. "Oh great, now she's running." I hooked a sharp right and then a left. I could still hear them behind me at this point. All I knew was that I couldn't stop moving. I had to lose them somehow. I was coming up to an apartment building with a small parking lot behind it. There were no lights. I made the split-second decision to veer off into the parking lot and I squeezed myself under one of the cars. I don't know how long I waited there. It could have been a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. I watched the two men run past. They didn't even bother to check under the cars, which was definitely in my favor. The minute I felt that I was safe, I backtracked and took a different route to my home. I was too scared to take the main route, in the fear that I would have bumped into them. I know what I'm about to say is stupid, but I didn't go to the police. I wouldn't have been able to give a proper description of the men because I hadn't seen their faces. If there's anything I learned from my experience, it's that no matter who you are, you need to be extremely careful. You can think that the part of town or city that you live in is safe, but that really isn't the case. There's no protective barrier to keep out people with bad intentions. Please, whatever you do, watch your surroundings as if your life depends on it. If I'd been listening to my music and not paying attention, I hate to think what could have happened to me. I hope that no one else has to experience the fear that I did. It was almost like the prey being chased by predators. And to the men that followed me, let's never meet again. And that is why I also have a fear of parking lots. I know this didn't occur in a parking lot for the most part, but people get preyed upon in parking lots specifically, mainly because at night they tend to be empty. A lot of them have really bad lighting, but things like this, I mean, like, is it really surprising that I'm paranoid? Now that I'm reading all these things, I'm like, actually, maybe you're just justified. Maybe you're not crazy as opposed to what your family thinks. I'm glad that she got away. I'm glad that she was smart and aware of what was going on, but it does really make me sad that people have to be that aware. Like, of course, being aware of your surroundings is necessary, but it's a different thing when it's being aware in order to save your life rather than just, you know, so you don't trip and fall or something more wholesome, I guess. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let me know if these touched upon any of your fears, and if you'd like other videos like this, let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons as always. Let's get right into the fan art.